In their very first rate announcement of 2017, the Bank of Canada surprised no one, leaving their policy rate unchanged at 0.5%. What is catching attention? It's the bank's concerns about things like US policies, global outlooks, household spending, and even slow Canadian business investment. To help us break down what matters to investors, I'm joined by DePratto, Senior Economist at TD Economics. Now, I want to start with the statement today. You weren't calling for any type of change in rates, but what caught your attention?
One thing that stood out for me right away, right up front in the statement, they were talking about the loonie. They're worried about the level of the Canadian dollar versus the US. And we know Polaz has been thinking about this, but it's a bit unusual and a bit surprising to see it so front and center in the statement. The other big surprise was a little more subtle, but the core inflation measures, it's something they've used as a guidepost for inflation and setting policy. They introduced some new measures late last year, but now they're no longer providing a forecast of those core measures, which is a bit unusual and a bit of an odd change in my opinion.
Now, when we compare what we had heard back in December, our last Bank of Canada announcement, to what we heard today, what were the notable changes for you?
One thing that stood out for me was the risks that the Bank of Canada is thinking about. In the previous statement, they were seen as roughly balanced. Here, you have a bit more of a skewing of the risks to the downside. You have more downside risks and you have some new ones. The first new one is protectionism. I think we're all aware of the risk of protectionism given political events south of the border. Canada is a trading nation, big concern there, not surprising to see it in the statement. The other risk relates to rising interest rates. We've already seen this as well feed through as people think about US growth. Canadian 5-year bond rate, mortgage rates have both risen since the fall. The Bank of Canada doesn't really want to see a whole lot more of that. They don't want a high rate policy right now, so that's a big concern for them.
Last week we heard from the Bank of Canada. They released their Business Outlook survey, and we had seen a pretty big improvement in business sentiment. We had a big jobs report back in December with sizable gains made in full-time employment, but you had said that's not enough for the bank to be stirred to action. Why not?
It's all about the context. Business Outlook survey was a very, very positive report. Intentions around investment and hiring both up. But we are coming off of 7 straight quarters, almost 2 years of declining business investment in this country. So you're coming off a very low base, and so the Bank of Canada is not going to want to do anything to sort of nip that potential recovery in the bud. Similarly, on the hiring side, again, very, very strong report, very nice to see, lots of full-time gains. But if you look at 2016 as a whole, the majority of the gains were in part-time, and that's not always the sign of a healthy economy. So again, it's a little bit of caution is warranted around those positive numbers.
And since the US election and Trump's surprise victory, the market's been pricing in the US from the Fed 2 to 3 rate hikes over the next year. In Canada, Stephen Poloz came out today and said, a rate cut is actually on the table for us. Is that your base case? What do you think is going to happen with rates here?
I think ultimately not a whole lot. Our view is that the Bank of Canada is likely to be happy leaving rates at 0.5% where they are right now, probably well into late next year. They're going to actually be pretty happy to see the Federal Reserve hike. When you see the US rates going up and Canadian rates staying the same, usually that puts a little bit of downward pressure on the loonie. We know Polaz is concerned about that, so it might be an optimal outcome for him. That said, the risks are clearly skewed to the downside. We saw Polaz discuss that in terms of a cut. Should some of those risks materialize, the likely move would be a cut, but for now, that's not our base case.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.